So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Jeff Tejcek. So Jeff is the founder of Virtual EDMR. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. Mike. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I really wanted to chat with you today. I know EMDR is, an up and coming treatment. And now you've made it available, virtually for people. So I'm going to get into that. But just before we do, Jeff, can you just give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about myself in relation to EMDR. I had crippling PTSD from a pretty ugly childhood, and it really manifested in my 40s. I guess it'd actually be my late 30s. And I went and saw an EMDR therapist. This is in Colorado, and it was unbelievably transformative for me, like how I was able to deal with my PTSD symptoms. And the other thing that I started working with this guy in just a handful of sessions was my fear of flying. And it was literally during those sessions that I was watching what he was doing. I was listening to the questions that he was asking me. And I said to myself, someone can figure out a way to duplicate this process, to come up with technology on the internet that it helps with the eye movements so that people can start doing EMDR on their own and without a therapist. And, I just wanted to help some people. I was particularly interested in maybe helping some military vets, and I had no intention at all of switching careers or of starting a company. And 100% completely by accident, the virtual EMDR company was born. And now, about 10 years later, we provide more EMDR sessions than any other organization in the world. So I'm very happy to have had this opportunity. And speaking personally, EMDR has been unbelievable for me, not only with working through my PTSD symptoms, but when I started to work through my fear of flying stuff. I didn't get on an airplane for 11 years. And the idea of just thinking about being in a plane and looking out the window and seeing the sky thousands of feet down would just make my whole chest tighten up and my palms sweat. And after doing EMDR, I've been all over the world. And since I've been in like 35 countries, I live overseas now. So it's just been an unbelievably life-changing thing for me.
So it's worked for you essentially, which is, amazing. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for something that works.
Yes.
And with regards to EMDR, so, a lot of people, probably don't even know, what we're talking about with regards to EMDR. So could you, Jeff, just give everybody, a brief overview of what EMDR is?
Yeah. So the letters EMDR stand for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which I think is a pretty horrible name. I tend to just call it eye movement therapy, which is also not particularly an accurate name. But in the late 1980s, a mental health professional discovered that by moving her eyes or stimulating the hemispheres of her brain while thinking bothersome thoughts, she was able to sort of help her brain process those thoughts in a new way. And it gave her the idea to explore this. And quite accidentally, EMDR was born. And in the last 35 years, since there's been, EMDR has been done on millions of people by hundreds of thousands of therapists all around the world. And basically what EMDR is by using eye movements, moving your eyes back and forth, or by using tones that go from ear to ear, audio tones, you're stimulating the hemispheres of your brain. And if you do, you back and forth, you're stimulating the hemispheres of your brain. And if you do this while thinking about particularly difficult or traumatic things, the way that you feel about those things will change. So in the last 35 years, mental health professionals have come up with different ways to do EMDR so that it can be used. Initially, it was only used to treat trauma and PTSD almost exclusively in military veterans. And since then, now they have come up with protocols for anxiety, or using it for depression, fears, phobias. It can be useful for a lot of things. I mean, speaking personally, I've used it around addictive behavior with myself around food. Uh, Before I did, this is about 3 years ago, before I did EMDR around food, I weighed 286 pounds. And I've managed to lose 80 pounds and keep it off for 3 years. And I credit EMDR for changing my relationship with food and helping me to be more rational with food. I don't think I could have ever lost 80 pounds just on my own with my own self-will. So that's sort of a simple background of what EMDR is. It's the go-to therapy for the World Health Organization, for the US Department of Veterans Affairs. It's used by governments all over the world, and it's a very typical therapy that's used for PTSD.
And I saw too that there was a review, I think, done in 2014. I forget how many studies were included in it, but you know, it was either 20 or 30 upwards of studies that indicated that it actually works more effectively or quicker than CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, which has sort of kind of been the mainstay therapy for a lot of the mental health conditions that we're talking about today. Which is, you know, very, very interesting, surprising, but also, you know, an excellent thing to know, because a lot of people with PTSD need that quick help, and they also want something that's going to work quickly, because I find, and this, you know, you can say this across almost any treatment for anything, that if a treatment doesn't work, you know, fairly quickly, sometimes people get discouraged and they think that, oh,
Yes.
this is not going to work, and they're going to stop, right? But if you're doing EMDR and say, you know, just on, you have a great session on your very first session, you know, you're much, much more likely to go back. So do you find that a lot of people who are doing EMDR, you know, initially find that, you know, this is sort of the best type of therapy that they've done? Like, they'll do, a lot of people say that after their first or second session. You know, what's been your feedback with that?
Yeah, so I'm so tremendously lucky to have started this company, because one of the things that I just love is people email me, or people, you know, comment on social media or whatever about, and they, you know, they'll say, I just did a couple sessions and I feel so much better. My affect has changed. The way that I feel about the things that I'm afraid of has changed. So yes, it definitely works quickly. Um, that being said, though, it really depends on the person. If a person has a single incident trauma that they're trying to work through, like they were in a really bad car accident, they were robbed at gunpoint, something like that, a kind of a problem that fits neatly into a box, they can get through EMDR pretty quickly and feel a lot better with that. Someone who has more complex issues and a greater number of issues that they're dealing with, they're going to need more EMDR sessions. And one other thing I'd like to say really quick is, let's say you're a first responder or a military vet or something like that, and you do some EMDR and your trauma symptoms, your PTSD symptoms are a lot better. That doesn't mean that traditional talk therapy is off the table. It's still really helpful for people to just not do EMDR, but just sit down with a therapist and just unpack and say, well, here's what happened to me, and let's talk about my childhood and my feelings and all that kind of stuff. Those are different things. EMDR can help you deal with the symptoms, the overwhelm, the emotions, all that, the anxiety, all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that you don't want to talk to somebody about what you've been through.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I never really thought of it as, you know, a, not necessarily like a replacement as much as like an adjunctive therapy too, you know. And in terms of
Yeah.
mental health, I mean, it's always going to be multifactorial, meaning, like, you know, if you just
Yes.
introduce EMDR, for sure, you know, you may in fact just get better just with EMDR, but likely you're going to get better if you start exercising, you start using EMDR, you know, you take some good supplements. Like there's some ones out there like saffron, for example, has a lot of really good evidence for it. You make sure that you're going to bed on time, you're practicing good sleep hygiene, you make sure that you're eating well. There's so many different things that go into becoming a resilient person and building better mental health. And just to think that like one intervention is going to do it, you know, realistically is not that realistic. And I come across this a lot in my field because I'm into psychedelics. And, I do
Uh-huh.
think that psychedelics are incredibly powerful tool. And sometimes people do have these, one-time transformations where they, don't really need to do other medicines again, or they cure addictions with just, one kind of heroic dose of a psilocybin session. But, for the most part, you're going to need more than one session, and you're going to need more than one just treatment modality. Talking about psychedelics right now, like it's always going to be
Yeah.
very, very multifactorial. So I really appreciate you saying that point about talk therapy.
And I very much agree with what you just said. I do EMDR coaching sessions on Zoom, and I lead coaching groups sometimes for EMDR. And one of the things I consistently say to people, or I just ask people, is, are you sleeping regularly? Are you getting
Yeah.
some exercise? It doesn't have to be perfect. Are you going for walks? Are you sitting down and enjoying the sunset? Are you eating reasonably nutritious food? Are you calling up a friend on the phone and saying, "Hey, friend, how you doing?" And connecting with another human being. If those pieces aren't in place, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but if those pieces aren't in place, then I don't know, if things are going to work out for somebody if they're
Yeah,
not doing those basic things.
and again, not to get too off topic again, but I had posted something actually recently about friendship, and how friendship has kind of been the most impactful thing on people's overall mental health and even physical health, as
Mhm.
well. Like as much as say like smoking cessation or exercise. There was in the graph that I saw anyway that I posted recently, it was actually even more important than those things. So having social connection, I think, is very, very important. And I say that too because we have these tools, we introduce these tools like EMDR. When you start to feel better, that means you can start to reach out to other people. I
Mhm.
understand how someone can be too depressed to exercise, or they can be too depressed to go outside or call someone. And in those instances, I think something like EMDR is incredibly valuable because it
Yes.
can get you from that point of where you can't initiate to when you can initiate. And then once you can initiate, then it is on the person then to start to do the things like to exercise and to reach out to other people. So it's always got to
Yes.
be this very kind of like, multifactorial approach. And I know that wasn't one of the, things that we were going to maybe chat about today, but I think it's very important for people to know who are listening that it's always got to be multifactorial. Um,
Yes. Agreed.
so with regards to the EMDR, I mean, one thing I think a lot of people, even though you gave a wonderful overview, I think a lot of people still want to know, what actually happens in the process. Because, people are going to say like, okay, like I'm just looking at a screen that where it looks like two people are playing pong and my eyes are going back and forth. Like, how is this, actually going to help treat my traumatic memories? And I'm just wondering if you could, Jeff, go into as much detail as you can about what it looks like when someone starts an EMDR session, and take us through the process until the end, if you can.
Yeah. So to be more specific, I'd like to walk you through what it's like when somebody does a virtual EMDR process. So that's
That's
my
perfect.
program, the
Yep.
self-guided online program. It's the same thing, really, as an EMDR therapist would do with a client. We're just sort of more direct about it. So you sit down, ideally in front of your computer, you put some earphones on, and our program will ask you questions to start about the things that are bothering you. This is helping you to formulate a target to figure out the things that you need to work through. So it'll ask you questions like, what is the incident that's upsetting you? Is it something in your past? You can type right in there, I had a car accident 3 years ago, and now I'm afraid to drive. And it will continue to prompt you, and it will ask you, when you think back to your car accident, what kind of sights, sounds, and smells do you remember? And you type your answer right into the screen. And by the way, these are the same things that an EMDR therapist would do. Instead, the EMDR therapist would just ask you these questions. The purpose of asking you these questions is to get those neurons firing in your brain, that brain activity around what happened to you that horrible day when you had the auto accident, the bone jutting out of your leg, the terrifying ride in the ambulance to the hospital, the surgery, all of it. Bring up those emotions by answering those questions. And once you start to bring up those emotions, you will start using the EMDR software. And when you do that, you'll be instructed, you want to think about your answers to the question while you watch the moving object on screen and while you listen to the tones that go back and forth in your ears. And what will happen is you'll feel an increased intensity thinking about the auto accident while the EMDR software is running. It might get upsetting. You might feel your jaw tightening up, your fists clenching. You're really working mentally through some of those things. After you do that for a while, and this is standard with any EMDR session, but after you do that for a while with virtual EMDR, you're going to turn the process around and do a positive installation, which is you're going to answer another series of questions, except these questions are around positive things, which are, how would you like to feel when you're driving instead? Helping you to realize that you're actually quite safe in your car, and just because you had an accident once doesn't mean it's going to happen again. Once you answer those positive questions and come up with your what's called a positive cognitions, you'll use the EMDR software a second time, except this time, while you're following the moving object on screen with your eyes, while you're listening to the tones in your ears, you'll think about the positive answers that you gave to that second set of questions. After you do this process, you use the EMDR software twice, and then you do some breaths to sort of close out your session. You'll find that you feel way better. And you'll find that your charged emotions around your car accident, around driving, around being a passenger in a car, around car horns going off, any of that, the volume will be turned down on that from the EMDR. And as you continue to do sessions, the volume will be turned down more. Another classic example is a military vet with PTSD who is, terrified by loud noises, fireworks, all that kind of stuff. The volume will turn down on that fear, and then the next time they encounter a loud noise or fireworks or whatever it might be, they'll recognize that they sort of already worked through it with EMDR, and it doesn't bother them in the same way. It's sort of like their brain has had an opportunity to digest those traumatic memories and to start to feel better. So does that sort of explain, like, walking through what a virtual EMDR session would be like?
I mean, I've put myself through the sessions, Jeff. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. So I have a pretty good idea of what you just explained. So maybe there's some additional questions that I have that some other people may have when they're going through it as well. So in terms of the selection, like when you come to the point where you do the desensitization process. So essentially, that is what we're talking about here, the EMDR therapy. You get to select like the object size, the object speed. I think there might be one or two other parameters that I'm missing there.
Yeah.
What are your kind of thoughts on, how fast should the speed be initially? How big should the ball be? There's, a couple different things like that. I was wondering, if you could give me a couple tips on, what would be the best way to start.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who doesn't quite understand what Dr. Mike means, he's talking about the EMDR software. And on there's a menu that lets you change the color of the moving visual stimulus, what the background looks like, how fast it goes, what the tone sounds like, the pattern, all that kind of stuff. So um, to answer your question, during desensitization, you want to do what you can to really bring those uncomfortable feelings forward. And our research indicates, and just to back up, I'm so grateful to be in the position I'm in with this company, because people email me all the time, and they say, hey, have you guys thought of changing this one thing? And then I say to myself, no, we haven't. And that's an awesome idea. And then we change it and it improves our program. So what we found based on so many emails from people contacting us who are happy with the program is that during desensitization, that's when you're thinking about the quote unquote bad stuff with EMDR. A faster speed is better, louder is better. And then when you're choosing a tone on the EMDR software, choose a tone that's more annoying and less pleasant, because during desensitization, what you want to do is really bring those memories and all those uncomfortable emotions bubbling to the surface before you turn around and do the positive part. So faster and louder, definitely.
And then when you're looking at the screen, like it's, essentially, and again, I'm not knocking on your software. I think your software is incredible. But it does look like, two people are playing Pong, essentially, for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
So when you are actually doing the eye movement desensitization, you're not supposed to move your head. Is that right? Like you should just be moving like your eyes kind of like back and forth like that, as opposed to your head back and forth. Is that correct?
It is correct. And I have a lot to say about this. So we're sort of talking at a weird time. And what I mean by that is virtual EMDR is about to launch all new versions of its programs, maybe in the next 6 weeks. We're even adding 3 new programs. And when we're doing that, we're changing a lot of stuff. Yes, including changing the EMDR software. We're improving it. Again, this will probably be like our 8th version of the EMDR software. But yes, that's correct. Keep your head still with your with your face about arm's length away from your computer screen, and then move your eyes back and forth and follow the ball. When the ball hits the right side of your screen, you'll hear the tone in your right ear. When the ball moves to the left side of the screen, you'll hear the tone in your left ear. Now, on our new version, again, I love people who use our program emailing me and suggesting things. On our new version, there's actually going to be a switch to turn the visual portion off if you want to, and just listen to the tones. The tones back and forth will still stimulate the hemispheres of your brain. And the reason that we're doing this is some of our users found it a bit too much to try and think about the bad stuff, plus move their eyes, plus focus on the stuff going on in their ears at the same time. So, but yes, you are correct. Don't move your head. And it just takes a little practice to learn how to do it. So.
Okay. And then in terms of, how it actually works, like from what I have read, there's still a lot of confusion about this and a little bit of mystery. So, how did it come about that, like, was EMDR even discovered, and how did people understand that, by doing this, eye movement desensitization, that they can actually reprocess some of their memories?
So, I mean, again, it was discovered completely and randomly by accident. And this mental health professional, Francine Shapiro, she passed away in the last few years, found that if she did the eye movements in this way, while she thought about something that she identified as a traumatic memory, she felt better about it. And from there, it just opened the door for her and other therapy professionals to start testing it on people. And that opened the other door for them to come up with a formal protocol, a formal number of steps of here's how we do this. Here's how we carry people through sessions. This is kind of a funny story, but when virtual EMDR started, this is back in Colorado, we actually got some of our initial volunteers, just people from the 12-step community, like AA, NA, some of those people who were just willing to give us a chunk of their time for free just to try the program and to sort of say to us, and this is an old, horrible, terrible first version of our program. What a piece of junk looking back, but it's the same thing that the early EMDR founders did. These people volunteered, and then they were able to tell us, this is confusing. This makes sense. Have you considered this? And help us put a program together. So that's how they started EMDR. And that's how they landed on the standard or classic EMDR protocol that a lot of therapists still use, or some therapists still use.
With regards to the eye movement, so I understand that when people do, like when MAPS does like MDMA journeys with people and that kind of thing to reprocess memories for PTSD, which seems to be very effective, and hopefully we'll be able to use that medicine on people in the future for PTSD. But from my understanding is when that happens, people do have like some crazy eye movement patterns. Like I've seen some videos on like YouTube and stuff, and some things from MAPS where people are, when they are under the influence of MDMA, their eye has some crazy eye movement patterns. And then so I'm just wondering, like, is there a link between the two? And when people are on MDMA and they're getting these incredible results for their PTSD, is there something going on with the eyes? I know that's maybe a question that I'm not sure if that's within your field or not, but.
So I love talking about this because the answer is who knows. And here's what I mean.
Yeah.
If they take somebody and they do like a SPECT scan on their brain before EMDR, and they can see that that brain is overactive, it's loaded with spots that are overactive. Then let's say that person does like 6 sessions of EMDR, and then they do a SPECT scan again on that person's brain. Well, they can see that the overactivity has decreased substantially. Why? I don't think that we know enough about the human brain to understand why. The current theory behind the eye movements is that it replicates the process that we go through in REM sleep. So in REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, I realize you know all this stuff, your eyes move back and forth. And the theory is that that's when you sort of digest your thoughts and memories from the day. By replicating that process with EMDR, you're able to do the same thing with traumatic memory. But again, and I think it's so cool to say that we don't know, because there's such a universe of mystery out there about how humans work, how thinking works, all that kind of stuff. Again, they don't entirely know why it works, or what part of what biological or neurological processes it's directly linked to that make it work.
Okay. And one question I have about your program specifically. So I know that when you open the program, you guys have various different protocols. Like there's a PTSD protocol, there's a I can't remember all of them, but there's like, I think there's an anxiety protocol, a depression protocol. There is like several different protocols. I think there's 6 or 7 of them. So when people select these protocols, are they different from one another once they get to the eye movement desensitization reprocessing spot? So is the actual treatment different, or is it just that the prompts before the treatment are different?
Yeah, so when EMDR started, there was just one protocol, and it's really cool. EMDR therapists have over the decades come up with new and innovative ways to use EMDR. Your question is the actual portion of using the software, your eyes going back and forth, listening to the tones in your ears. Is that different? No, that's called processing, and processing is processing. But for each of the different programs that we have, the approach, the questions that you're asked, the things that you're suggested to think about, the way that you rate your emotional distress, that stuff is different. And just to sort of mention really quick, the programs that we currently have are the standard protocol, which is written so you can sort of use it for anything. We have an anxiety protocol, a depression protocol, a fears and phobias protocol, an addictions protocol, and then a grief and loss protocol, which actually works really well for people who are grieving. It really helps them through that process. And also, I'd just like to say really quick, we're launching in the next couple of months 3 brand new protocols. We're doing the virtual EMDR youth program, which is designed for young people, let's say age 10 to 17. It really sort of turns down the complication level. We're doing a personal performance EMDR program, and this is for people who feel like they have sort of blocks from helping them to get what they want in their life, whether it's dating or sinking a golf ball on the putting green. And then lastly, the one I'm most proud of that we have coming out is gratitude and appreciation EMDR. And that's to be able to use EMDR to consistently recognize on a neurological level everything that you have to be grateful for. But to answer your question, no, the actual software portion of EMDR does not change in the different programs that we have. It's the questions, the way those questions are designed, the way that those questions are make you think about your problem that are different for each one.
Okay. And then how would your program, like the virtual EMDR program, be different than, say, if someone, went to someone in person, or even, went to someone, virtually? And what would, like, how are those different?
So I'm so glad that you asked this, because this is really important. People who sign up for virtual EMDR, the vast majority of them do really well with our program. But there are people who have a hard time with technology. Our technology is easy, but that's not the point. I'm talking of someone in their 70s, something like that. People who won't really read directions, that, you have to be able to read the directions and do what the program tells you. And then we have people who are, perhaps you could say, so emotionally overwhelmed that doing EMDR by themselves is simply too difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to have a therapist sitting next to them, a therapist literally sitting there saying, now I want you to do this. Now I want you to think about this. Now stop. So again, for the vast majority of people who use virtual EMDR, they find it really effective. When people email me and say, it's too much for me to learn, and by the way, our program is simple if you just read the instructions. But for people who email me and say, they don't want to learn, or they would rather have somebody guide them through that process, I suggest to them, get on Google, find an EMDR therapist in your area. And as a rule, I give those people their money back if they paid anything to us, because I want to help them. So to answer your question, how is it different though? The process with an EMDR therapist is slower. The first couple sessions, Michael, that you would spend with an EMDR therapist would just be what's called resourcing, talking about what your problem is, what you want to work on, how you can feel better if you don't feel well emotionally. It's a much slower process. With virtual EMDR, it's much more straightforward. Like, figure out what you want to focus on, work through the session, do the calming breaths afterwards, get on with your day. So, which works much better for some people and not as well for other people. For example, we do a lot of charity work with military vets, first responders. We were even giving our program away for free during the height of the COVID pandemic to frontline healthcare workers. And we find a lot of these sort of people, sort of like, tough people, they don't want to sit down with a therapist and talk about their problems, and they're pretty grateful to do it on their own without a therapist. So it really depends on the person, but the shortest answer would be, with a therapist, it's slower and it's more directly guided through EMDR, through the steps of the process.
Okay, so one question about is that, so prior to the process of the actual EMDR desensitization, you have these prompts, whereas if you went to a therapist, then you would be talking about them with the therapist. Once you get to the actual process, so the EMDR process, if you went to a therapist, are they talking to you or giving you prompts while you're doing the actual EMDR process of, scanning your eyes back and forth? Or during that time are you sort of left to be silent in the room with a therapist?
It really depends on the therapist. Most of them will allow you to periodically stop and talk about what you're experiencing. But again, it really depends on the EMDR therapist. Respectfully, a lot of EMDR therapists are still archaic enough that the way they do EMDR is they hold their finger up in the air and then they say, Michael, follow my finger back and forth with your eyes. They have, no audio technology, nothing like that. So it really depends on the therapist. It also depends on how much experience the client has. So they sort of let you go until something new comes up, or one particular thought leads you down the pathway to another particular thought. And what they'll generally do at that point is say, okay, go with that, go with the new thought. So this is something we could not offer in a self-guided program. And this was the challenge with a self-guided program. How do we keep the meat, the important parts of an EMDR session there when there's not a therapist sitting next to the person? So it depends on the therapist, though. Some therapists will let their clients process much longer than others.
And I think too, you mentioned the audio portion there, and I think that's critically important as well. Just because we've kind of focused on not necessarily, but a little bit just on the eye movement. I mean, that's the name of the treatment. So
Yeah.
people kind of think about that a lot. But in terms of the audio, I'm kind of just thinking out loud now. But I heard Andrew Huberman on Joe Rogan the other day, who was talking about Robin Carhart Harris and how he had a new study came out. I guess it would be 2 days ago, I think now, on DMT, so dimethyltryptamine, which is the most potent psychedelic to mankind of thing. And he was indicating that in some of the sessions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with DMT, it can be with psilocybin or with anything, that on these guided journeys, the audio makes a big difference. So like when you do these psychedelic kind of journeys, like you're going to have a very different experience if you do it in complete silence. And I understand, what Terence McKenna, used to say about doing it in complete darkness. And I think there's a lot of, therapeutic value there. I also think there's a lot of, therapeutic value in the audio portion as well. So, I'm glad that you brought up the audio portion of this, because I do think, and I also believe just in general, that music makes a massive difference in your life and in your mood. I mean, I listen to music all the time, and even when I'm not listening to music, like when I'm just eating supper with my fiance, or we're just cooking, like I always have like lo-fi beats going on or something like that. I do feel that it makes a very big change. So in terms of EMDR, like, do you feel that the audio portion is critically important? Because I was very much impressed, and I liked the fact that it says in your program, go to a quiet room, put in some earphones and start, because I do believe in the power of healing with, like, not necessarily healing with tones, but just that having some something in the background, whether it's music or not, can make the difference, the experience of whatever you're having completely different. And I imagine that would be the same thing with EMDR.
Yeah, so virtual EMDR has dual bilateral stimulation. So that's, you're following the object with your eyes and also listening to the tones in your ears. Traditionally, EMDR was the therapist would just hold up their finger and say, follow my finger with your eyes. But one of the other things that therapists have now, in-person therapists, which is dual bilateral stimulation, is there's no eye movement at all. It's just headphones for tones going back and forth in the ears. And then you hold these little buzzing paddles in your hands. So when the tone goes to the right ear, the little thing in your right hand buzzes. When the tone goes to your left ear, the little thing in your left hand buzzes. So one other thing about sound specifically is, when we created virtual EMDR, we had to create it really open and non-specific, because some people prefer just to do eye movements with their volume off. Some people like to shut their eyes and just listen to the bilateral tones when they process. So it really depends on the person. And it's kind of a mixed bag. I think both are the best, but I completely agree with you that there's something about adding sound to the overall mechanism, which makes you more present and makes it more effective. I completely agree with what you're saying.
And also too, he mentioned too, because we're obviously talking about eyes today, you know, he mentioned that the mask is critically important when you're doing these DMT kind of sessions, so to, you know, cover your eyes. But again, like, you know, what we're kind of getting at here is like your eyes and the audio that you're hearing seem to be critically important in the treatment that you're doing, whether it's, you know, with psychedelics or whether it's with EMDR. And
Yes.
again, we're
Yes.
talking about, you know, treating PTSD and reprocessing memories. And it seems
Yes.
like, you know, the audio portion and the visual portion of those two things is critically important. So, you know, I'm glad that we had you know, some time to chat about the audio portion today.
Can I just say really quick? I mean, what would it be like to use psychedelics like you're talking about for treatment, while at the same time having bilateral audio tones going from ear to ear? How would those things integrate together? I don't know if anyone's tried that at this point. There are so many things that we can try to see if it increases treatment effectiveness. So it would be really interesting to know if how those two things would be put together and if someone had an opportunity to try that.
Yeah, I've thought about that before, and yeah, I mean, we can certainly chat afterwards, but maybe we can even, you know, put something
Let's
together
do it.
because
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Let's do it. I'd
because
love to do that.
you know, I've genuinely thought about that before. I was like, you know, I wonder how much more, maybe I'm wrong, but I wonder how much, you know, more effective this may be if, you know, you're under the influence of psychedelics while doing the EMDR therapy, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
I think that's a worthwhile experiment for people to look into.
I mean, that would be amazing. Now we're not just talking about psychological, uh, not just talking about doing it with the bilateral audio tones, but actually having somebody who's using these chemicals while doing an EMDR session, while directing their thoughts towards particular things like that. That would just be fascinating to see how that would work. And FYI, I'm a million% on board. After this, we'll communicate and absolutely we'll do that.
Okay. Okay. Well, we definitely will do that when we go offline. One thing too that I wanted to ask you about today. I mean, a lot of people are, you know, sort of wondering, you know, they think that and, you know, rightfully so, that their, you know, PTSD or their trauma or their symptoms are just so severe that, you know, nothing's going to work or nothing's going to fix them, kind of thing. And obviously that, you know, just
Yeah.
having that thought is part of their, you know, symptoms itself, right? That's because that's a negative self-believing thought that's
Yes.
been
Yes.
implanted. But you know, have you had people, you know, who are really, really severe have success on this program? And part of the reason why I bring this up is because there was a football player, Derek Wolfe, who was on Joe Rogan recently, and you know, he explained his childhood, and it was just horrific, like horribly horrific. And you know, he has obviously become, you know, a very productive person in society. He's, you know, has a family now, and he seems to be like he's doing very, very well. But you know, the thing that he said that helped him get over some of those experiences was EMDR. And he
Yeah.
said that, you know, when he was doing it, he was like he was crying during like the process, and he said he was going back to his, you know, old self and his old feelings, and he was like cuddling himself when he was,
Uh-huh.
you know, like needed to be soothed as a youth. So, you know, pretty dramatic experience that he had with EMDR, and very, very successful experience, but on his account. So have you had someone, you know, it's hard to say, you know, what someone's PTSD is like compared to someone else, but have you had people with like, you know, really severe PTSD use the virtual EMDR program and in fact get good results?
Yes, I've had both. So owning this company, I've done where I've conducted EMDR coaching sessions with people. I've heard horror stories that just make my skin crawl to think about what some of these people went through in their childhood, or even for some of the military guys I've worked with or first responders, some of the just stuff that they've seen and just had to deal with. Um, so yes, we've had people with incredibly severe symptoms use virtual EMDR successfully. We've had other people with incredibly severe symptoms email me or contact me and say, this isn't working for me, and I'm worried about this, and I'm worried about that. And these are the people that I tend to say, look, let's find you an EMDR therapist in your area because you need someone to work with. There's one other thing that's, I think, really important about what you're talking about, and this directly relates to virtual EMDR. If you want to get better from something, or if you want to get better at something, no matter what it is, you have to apply yourself. And part of virtual EMDR is literally you have to go in the other room and close the door and open up your laptop and do a session. Nobody's going to do a session for you. Nobody's going to force you to go in the other room and do it. So we find, and at this point, we provide more EMDR sessions than any organization in the world. We provide thousands of EMDR sessions every month. And the people who contact us and talk to us about this stuff all the time, we find people who step up, they follow the program, they say, I'm going to do 6 sessions or 8 sessions in the next 3 weeks or whatever, and they do it, they feel better. People who go into it saying, I'm hopeless and I can't do anything and I'll never feel better, and they've already sort of, and I mean this respectfully, I
Yeah,
feel for people who are
I
struggling,
agree.
but they've defeated themselves beforehand.
Yeah.
Um, and again, when those people contact me, what I tend to do is help them to find a therapist to work with in their area, because they're going to need more than a self-guided program. But the short answer is yes, we have had people with horrible trauma stories who have used virtual EMDR successfully and have absolutely raved about how well it works for them.
Okay, excellent. And one thing I wanted to ask you about there, I forgot to ask about earlier, about the actual process is the time and also the frequency. So how many sessions per week do you think that people should be doing? And then also too, with regards to the time, so I know your program well. So it says that you can pick between 0 to 30 minutes for the desensitization process.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's 2 to 10 minutes for the installation. And then I think the breathing at the end is something like 2 minutes or something like that. So, if someone is starting off, like how many times per week, and in terms of the installation and the desensitization process, so desensitization first, installation second, how long should they pick?
So I have a lot to say about this. When you're seeing a therapist for EMDR, you got to pay $150 or $200 an hour and wait till next Tuesday at 3 p.m. for your 1-hour session. Virtual EMDR, on the other hand, you can do it whenever you want. And if you choose to do a session right now, but you're starving, you can't stop thinking about tacos through the whole session, and it just turns out to be a junk session, it doesn't matter. Shut your laptop and come back tomorrow. You don't have that pressure to sort of get it done in a 1-hour period. So
that's
as
actually
far
a
as
really good point. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but like,
no, it's okay.
if you have, a session, like you said, 3:30 on a Tuesday or whatever, but then, right before that session, something bad happens at work, or maybe you do a workout and you go too hard and you're, injured or something like that. Like, that can obviously affect that session. If you just tweaked your knee or something at the gym, and then an hour later you have to go to the session because that's the only time, and then the whole time when the person's looking, doing the eye movement thing, and you're just thinking about, holy shit, my knee is killing me right now, then and you can't predict that, you can't predict,
Yeah.
tweaking your knee or something. So it's I do think that there's a incredible advantage, that way. But I just wanted to kind of make that point. But yeah, if you could go ahead and let us know about the time and frequency, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, but first I want to talk about what you just said about the
Okay.
advantage. Here's the thing, if you have, you can only go to your EMDR therapist once a week, Tuesday at 3, but then you've got an explosive argument with your wife and your day is falling apart and your thoughts are exploding and you're angry and all this kind of stuff, and you really could use some EMDR right now. Well, with virtual EMDR, you can just do a session and you can feel way better. I will fully confess right now that on occasion, if something happens in my life that's really upsetting me, if I feel overwhelmed, if I have a fight with my spouse, whatever it is, I'll do an EMDR session and it'll really turn down the volume on those thoughts and help me to get in touch with my more rational thoughts about what's going on and my more positive thoughts. And you
Mhm.
can't really do that with therapist guided EMDR. No matter what's going on, you have to wait till next Tuesday at 3 p.m. And that's just the way that it is. So that's one of the other benefits of virtual EMDR is you can do a session when you need it. To answer your question about how often to do a virtual EMDR session and how long the virtual EMDR sessions are, I want to go back and say that we were forced to design our program intentionally sort of vague. And the reason is this person over here does well with sessions once a week that are 35 minutes. This person over here would rather use it 4 times a week for 20 minutes to get the best results. And because people who use virtual EMDR have unlimited access, they can sort of play around and figure out what works best for them. The shortest session that you can do is 20 minutes, and that's 20 minutes to answer the questions, to desensitize with the software, to answer the installation questions, to install with the software, and do the closing breaths. That would be a quickie session, but you can get a lot out of those. You can do longer sessions if you choose to, if you find those helpful. One other thing I want to say about this session length issue really quick is some people, when they're processing, when they're using the EMDR software, they want to let the EMDR software run for a longer period of time. They want to sit there for 20 minutes uninterrupted. Other people choose to do it 90 seconds at a time and then have set it to the timer to automatically stop and then go back and do another 90 seconds and then go back and do another 90 seconds because it helps keep them focused. So to answer your question, how often? It's up to the person to decide how often they want to do sessions. We don't recommend sessions by any means more than once a day. We also find, and this is through internal research from having provided thousands and thousands of sessions, that if you do a daily virtual EMDR session too many days in a row, it sort of loses its juice and you need to take a couple days off from doing it, from stimulating your brain in that way. A lot of people want to do a virtual EMDR session every day because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel much more relaxed and they don't have negative thoughts, but we don't recommend doing it too many days in a row.
Okay. So maybe like, just to put a number on it, like is 3 days a week a reasonable number?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. You'll get a ton out of 3 days a week. Here's the big thing that I suggest to people when I talk to them about using virtual EMDR. Get out a piece of paper and write down your whole plan, what you want to use EMDR for. I want to use EMDR for the car accident and my fear of driving. I want to do some sessions around the horrible divorce that I had and some of the grief that I carry around. I want to do some sessions around the fact that, totally making this up, that my mother was a drug addict and I lived in an unstable home. And you want to write down the things that you want to do some EMDR sessions on, and then do a handful of sessions on each one, and then assess for yourself, am I feeling better now about driving, about what happened in my childhood, or whatever issues I wrote down on my list. It's really helpful to write down and decide what it is that you think you want to work on, and then you can judge for yourself how well you're feeling.
Okay.
But
Well,
yes, 3 days a week would be fantastic for somebody, for sure.
I know we only have a few minutes left there, Jeff. So what haven't I asked you today that you think people should know about virtual EMDR?
Wow. Uh,
Or is there anything, or have we covered most of the stuff that you kind of wanted to cover?
Not particularly. I wanted to ask about you, actually, in
Okay.
the few minutes that we had left.
Yeah.
You had Theo Fleury on your show.
I did. I did have Theo on. I mean,
Ah,
Theo definitely has, um, he's gone off the rails a little bit, but he was, he's still a fantastic hockey player, and a lot of people I think enjoyed, the time that we or the podcast that we did together. I had some
uh-huh.
patients reach out and say that they had suffered from addictions in the past, and that he was definitely an inspiration to them. And he's say what you want about him, but he was someone who was abused, obviously severely sexually abused, and he was abusing alcohol, he was gambling, and from all accounts now, he's completely sober. I think he's been sober, I don't know how many years, but I think it's like more than a decade kind of thing,
Hmm.
and doesn't use any other drugs. And so I do think that he's still a valuable resource in the
Yeah.
addictions community, and the PTSD community. And I won't, I don't, I mean, no one agrees with everything on all subjects, and I certainly don't agree with everything that Theo says online. But it was still kind of cool to chat with someone that I kind of looked up to growing up. I mean, I was a Hawks fan, so I would kind of just like the Hawks players, Chicago Blackhawks players, but he always
Uh-huh.
still cheered for kind of the better players in the league, and he certainly had a real good run during his prime.
When the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup in '97, I don't even really know. We had Theo Fleury on the team, and he was worshipped as a god in Denver. He really was, and it was just such an exciting time. So it was really cool to see that he was on your show, and I'm a monstrous fan of him and his missing front teeth when he was a player. So yeah. Um,
Yeah, he's definitely an icon in Calgary for sure. So they love him up there, I think.
So to answer your question from before, I did think about what I would want to wrap up with. We give our program, we work for free with military vets, first responders, law enforcement. We don't just give our program away for free willy-nilly to everybody. And you wouldn't believe the people that contact me. They're like, oh yeah, I babysit 3 kids. Can I have your program for free? No, you can't. But if you are a military vet, if you are a first responder, if you're law enforcement, contact us and we'll hook you up with the program for free. Whether you're in the US, Canada, we've given it away to people in the UK, Australia. We're passionate about helping that community. So that's what I would wrap up with.
Amazing. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I think this virtual EMDR program can help a lot of people. So if anyone is interested, it's virtualemdr.com. And for everyone, thank you so much for listening. And as always, I'll be back again next week.